everyone. Thank you so much for watching another episode of the Weaviate Podcast. I'm super excited to welcome Charles Pierse, director of the Weaviate Labs team. We've recently announced the GA release of the Weaviate Query Agent. I'm super proud of this. I think we have a really compelling agent in production, agent product story, and I'm just super excited to dive into it further. Charles, thank you so much for joining.
Connor, it's great to be back. I think it's my fourth and a half on the podcast after the last one was cut short due to technical issues. But yeah, it's great to be back. I'm really looking forward to talking about the query agent and how the last couple of months of development have looked.
Yeah, I think this is our 128th podcast, but if I had to take halves for every time I've had like the MacBook audio pickup or have my camera out, I think I'd be at like 124. So yeah, awesome. Well, so the GA release of the Weaviate Query Agent, maybe even before diving into the tech, I think something that you do exceptionally well at Weaviate in your role with the Weaviate Labs team is not only running our team, but also coordinating across multiple teams from say, Alvin to Paul, Sebastian, Seb, Bob. Could you maybe describe sort of the collaborations within Weaviate behind the query agent?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the query agent is built by our team, the labs team, but it's just a component that in order to make it work seamlessly as part of like the Weaviate ecosystem, I think it needs like a lot of collaboration to get to that point to make it feel seamless. And I think one of the best things about working at Weaviate is how willing and open people are to work together to get something over the line. So, while we might have our team might have technically been working on like the technical development of the query agent, so much goes on in terms of collaboration to make this work. From working with Weaviate's console team to over the last couple of months to get the query agent in there in a native experience was a huge amount of work, and even just making the way that we make the query agent work kind of so and authenticate so magically with the console is because of the work we do with that team. And we work very closely with the product team at Weaviate to, especially over the last couple of months, to actually interview and talk to users of the query agent to get feedback on what they thought was working, what they thought was missing and not working really so well. And those conversations were like incredible to me I always really enjoyed going to them because the amount of unexpected things you would discover was just incredible. Like, watching people use it and it's like, oh, that's not what I expected you to do, but it's really interesting. So we learned so much from that. And then you have things like, the people that interact with the query agent through a client. So we need to integrate with like the client. So that means that we work with the core team on that element to make sure that the client experience, even though it's like the query agent is officially like a different service, that feels seamless as well. And then there's how we communicate about the query agent. So that kind of covers from all the way from documentation, which is fantastic and really clear, all the way over to how we post about this and build excitement and like let people that follow us know what the query agent is and what use cases and problems we solve for. So I love working with other teams, and I think it's like it's pretty impossible to not you can't be successful without collaborating well. I think in that sense, that's for most companies, right? You can't silo yourself off. So we really depend on kind of collaboration. And it's great to have another kind of launch over the line as a result of that great collaboration.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, it's just super cool, super awesome to see everyone coming together and working on this. And yeah, so awesome. Well, to warm up into the tech, can you maybe give sort of the elevator pitch for the Weaviate Query Agent for people who are new to what it is?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way I think about the query agent is that it's like your domain expert at utilizing Weaviate, utilizing its APIs, knowing how to, squeeze the most functionality out of Weaviate for you that works for you. So it's effectively like kind of a next generation interface that to databases that happens to be an agent, and you just talk to it in natural language and it will do everything it can in the background to answer that question or retrieve results for you in the best possible way.
Yeah, awesome. And maybe just kind of, you mentioned like sort of the lessons learned from talking to users, and that kind of like totally new things you hadn't thought about originally until you start seeing people trying to use it. Maybe just sort of the journey of like the initial beta release to now GA. I think the timeline is about like 6 months or so. Just what has that kind of been like?
Yeah, so I think like in March we released the query agent in preview, or like an alpha launch, and it's been free, open to all Weaviate Cloud users, whether they're sandbox or paid. And effectively during this period, we just wanted to let people use it. And, for those that were using it a lot, we might reach out and ask what you think, get some feedback. And kind of like the experience here was that we saw that there were certain use cases that were like really sticky with people coming back and using it a lot. So we would interview them or have conversations, and some of the effectively like what we were trying to like hone in on in these conversations was not like we would talk about it up front, like, oh, what's working, but really what I was really interested in was like what's not working, or like what's not meeting your expectations. And there was like a few things that like came up there that like broke my expectations of how people wanted to use the query agent. And I think like, speaking more broadly on like product development, I think it's like everyone aims to be objective when they're like building products and stuff like that. But it's very hard to be like purely objective. So like you make design decisions like I did that were kind of like how I would use it, and then that's not what I always saw. So for example, one thing that wasn't there when we launched was like a very kind of simple and standardized like chat functionality. So pretty much users weren't able to like really power like kind of like a chat application. It was kind of the intended functionality initially was just you type a query and get like an answer back. And then that it's like a one-off type thing. And you could pass in a little bit of prior context, but the assumption was that, oh, there won't be like, we don't want to be a chat app or anything like that. But then I saw how people were building with it, and they were building it into chat applications. And I was like, okay, so people want to be able to have this option to do the one-off kind of query mode like we had, where it does your query, does your filters, gives you back an answer. But they also wanted the ability to put that into a chat context. And because we didn't build that initially, users were being creative and working their own way around it. But we made the decision as part of the GA launch to like kind of revamp all of that interface and allow both the options for just passing a query or passing like a conversation history that updates over time as well. And then probably the biggest one, the biggest thing that, I imagine we'll chat about in this conversation, but the biggest kind of thing that I noticed some users were doing was that the original query agent run mode, as we called it, was very much designed to be like end to end. So it would take your query, route that to the right collections, because it can do multi-collection routing, break those queries up into constituent queries, query expansion, all of this, we worked in it. And then it would also write the answer for you. But I realized that there's a bunch of users that they really liked it for like all of its features up until the generative part. But some users actually wanted to build, their own, use it as like a component, a retrieval component that then gets passed to some other agent or some other feature or some other functionality. So they really didn't need that, like what we call like the evaluation step or the answer writing step. But they really liked the ability for the retrieval, like agentic retrieval effectively. So rather than them, what a lot of these users were doing was that they were, running the query agent, getting the answer, throwing that away, and just using the sources that were returned by it. So they just liked it for the sources. So as you know, like we kind of the team kind of banged their heads together and were like, well, maybe we should just build in a full retrieval search mode that just skips the generation part, but then we would really like refine the quality of like the retrieval results and make sure that you can effectively have an experience that feels like you're just querying in Weaviate, but when you look at the results, they're like really, really like tuned to what you said, and they can kind of capture both the fuzzy and structured parts of your query. And then we can still power a multi-collection search. We can re-rank across multiple collections, all of this kind of stuff. So that's where we got the idea for search mode from, and that's also now live as part of this GA launch.
Yeah, it's super interesting. There's so many like axes to this to sort of zoom into further. I think like just kind of listening to it, like if I was outside the walls of Weaviate, this sort of like lesson, I maybe just to talking to people who are building their own agents, this kind of like you come up with these different inferences and you're stitching together these inferences and then you're sort of saying, oh, I need to adapt it this way. It needs to actually have these output models, or I should even have like an exit path. And this one system I have can do multiple things. And yeah, that sort of design now.
It's probably like the other big lesson of the last 6 months of development is that like with agents, and I think this is like probably I think many people that work in agents, like kind of building like very domain specific agents, would probably echo the same thoughts. But getting up and running nowadays with agents has gotten like pretty smooth. Like you can do it with code, but you can do it through an interface as well using N8N, all of these really nice kind of agentic workflow builders. But what I've learned is like you can get to the point where it works in broad terms, like end to end, like relatively fast, but making it like an expert user and like catching all the edge cases. And I think edge cases is like the key word because there's so many edge cases, and you have to account for all of that. And that's like probably 80% of the work, in broad strokes was done around March. But then in terms of like getting it to be like really, really good and high quality, that's what takes time. And it's still something like we're always going to be working on that because users will always ask questions that like raise an edge case or something like that, or kind of demand another piece of functionality. So with agents, I think the barrier to entry has become quite low, but the groundwork and the hard work and this like the elbow grease is still required to get it to like that expert level. And I think that's probably true for many different types of systems, whether it's a database or some other type of interface to another type of system.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll definitely probably ask you for a hot take on evals at the end. And people who watch podcasts know I have chapters, so you can skip to that now if you want. But I want to really come back to kind of the sort of refinement, and you described it, and kind of maybe setting the stage with the design of the product and the kind of. I want to talk about the Python and TypeScript clients a little bit, just like how you think about sort of maybe inside Weaviate. I've seen how you think through like response models, and I think it's one of the most interesting things of just in my experience. I've learned a lot of software engineering from Weaviate and seeing how software engineers work, and sort of just discussing maybe like how do you think about the response models that are returned from the query agent, the arguments to the clients, what goes into that?
So like the whole like ethos for me with in terms of the clients and like the interface to them was that the goal here is like reducing workload and like making things simple. So for a user that wants to just run the query agent out of the gates, it should be possible to just create a query agent instance and just type a natural language query, however they want to structure that, and run it against Weaviate in like 2 lines. That's what it takes. You have your constructor and then you run it. And of course, there's ways of like kind of configuring it that will add more lines of code in, but that experience does exist where you can do that. So the whole idea is that this is an agent, so it's supposed to be like reducing the amount of manual work you're doing, whether it's filters, tenants, all of these types of things. It's supposed to be like a simple interface. So in terms of how you communicate with the query agent, that's really important, like just simplicity, because that's what we're aiming to solve for developers, a simpler interface to databases. And then in terms of the response model, it's like it's almost not the opposite, but it's definitely an idea of, well, the user has like given over control to this agent to do something for them that they would have done manually in the past. So I'd never thought that just giving an answer or a set of results was like that's all you need to do and just say, trust us. I think like the idea behind like how the response model is shaped and stuff like that was like also a big part of it was just building trust with the users. So we have like an audit trail effectively in the response model. So you have your answer or you have your search results if you're just doing search mode, but you also have things uh, like a formatted list of the actual searches that were run. So you would have given the query agent a natural language query, but the questions or the queries that were run against the database very likely were transformed somewhere along the way. So it's what we do is we return the actual queries that were run against the database by the agent back to the user. So if they need to, they could effectively like recreate the queries if they wanted to against the database manually themselves to see. And then you have it's the same for aggregations, and we also include kind of an interesting field, two interesting fields. One which is like a boolean, like is this a partial answer, and then missing information. And the idea there was just this is like from my own experience. Like I've kind of been toying in and out of explainable AI for a couple of years, and with LLMs, it's a little bit different to how explainable AI works with like kind of the older style like BERT models where you do perturbation. But the idea here was still to make this like an explainable AI system. So effectively, we give the model the models will write an answer to your question, but there's this optional field for missing information. And the whole idea there is just that if you wanted to have some sort of safeguard if you're building like a system and you wanted to have some sort of safeguard to alert downstream end users that, oh, this answer might not be fully comprehensive or something like that. Now there's like a direct field that you can like assert like is true and whether it exists. And if that's the case, it allows like kind of developer designers to develop an experience where they say, here's your answer, but also just so you know, we can tell that maybe something's not, we couldn't find something in your database to like fully answer this or fully motivate the answer or something like that. So the agent is the query agent is like effectively like a little bit like explainable in that sense. And then of course like we have sourcing because like the query agent is very much grounded in the data from your collections. So it's any kind of answers and stuff like that it gives and or results that it gives should be sourced from the database. It shouldn't be hallucinating. It shouldn't be kind of making up answers if something doesn't exist. So we make sure to, as part of the response model, actually, especially this is for ask mode, to return the objects and collections to which they belong with, so that again, as part of like building like an end-to-end product with it, someone could build a GUI application that shows the answer and actually shows the objects that kind of inspire that answer, I guess. And we do this in the console version of the query agent as well. It utilizes that feature. And of course, for search mode, it only returns answers. So that wasn't as much of a problem. But for what we call ask mode now, it was really important. And that's something we've made that better over time as well, how it sources.
Yeah, I think that just general topic of having this rich response from an agent API is so interesting. And yeah, maybe diving into these two things. I mean, obviously you'd expect the final answer, but then also having the structured searches and aggregations behind this sort of like, text to SQL with search. That's kind of how I just think about this is like, it's not just text to SQL because we're also adding this kind of search operator, but it's like one way maybe of thinking about it anyways. But yeah, that kind of explainability thing is so interesting. Maybe this is my first time I'm referencing my dad on the podcast, but he works at, there are 128 episodes. He's finally going to get a reference. So he works at Quest Diagnostics, and I was curious asking him what he thinks about AI. And for him, like that kind of explainability is a huge thing for them. They can't like give you just like an AI interpretation of your blood test results. Like, so I think that kind of explainability, that partial answer, missing information, I really love that. And then, yeah, that kind of citations. I don't know how, like, maybe diving in further to the citations thing. I'm just kind of curious about, what you think about the kind of hallucinations and citations. Do you think citations just kind of solves that? I know this is kind of taking a little bit of a detour, just
Yeah.
really interested in these topics, but yeah, like how much do you think citation sort of limits, like when you get an answer back and it's got citations, I think that sort of takes the bird, like I think one of the big criticisms of AI is, oh, it might hallucinate, and that sort of puts you off of it maybe, but this sort of citations thing seems like the
Yeah,
solution.
I think that's a really cool question because like I think citations is like, I'm not going to just say it's like the perfect, it's like absolutely, bulletproof, and like that's like kind of explainability solved. But we had like two interesting things that I learned like from this was that initially when we did the citations, we actually had the answer, and this, we had the answer and the citation kind of written in the same step by like the same process effectively. Um, that doesn't happen anymore. Now they kind of happen separately where the answer is constructed, and then we like kind of independently get this citation kind of tool call or agent call happening on that answer. And I think that like improves the adherence a little bit to like truly citing, because the citations aren't primed by like the answer writing as much. But kind of going back to your question, like I don't think you can't, like, citations aren't ever going to be perfect either, because you are dealing with an LLM under the hood. So in some instances, it might just want to take the path of least resistance and just find something in there to cite. So like that's always possible. Probably like if you really wanted to go very rigorous with this, what you could do is like make the citation step itself like its own kind of multi-layered agent where like it can like really kind of go into like a loop and like kind of prod the questions and poke around and be like, let's actually like let's look at each source individually and really like test how relevant it is to the actual answer that came back. But I would say like for the majority of use cases, the way we do it now is probably acceptable. But yeah, like if you're doing something like, oh, I don't know, something in like a medical domain or something like that, you might want to be, or like if you're kind of using it to do like very kind of mission critical sourcing or something like that, you might want to like make that citation a little bit more like rigorous or something like that. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people do it nowadays, and I think it's almost seen as like kind of a standard kind of response format for these applications. I mean, ChatGPT, Claude, they all have it now built into when you use their systems. You use it and you see like the nice web links and all that kind of stuff that were brought back. So basically my answer is it probably works for the majority of use cases, but there's always going to be like a few cases where maybe the LLM just, like I said, takes that path of least resistance.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty deep one. I even just like when I'm talking to ChatGPT with say deep research and it's citing sources, and I'm like, oh, that's the source you're using. Like, you want to sort of, and so this kind of bring your sources. I mean, obviously that's kind of generally a big setup to this, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's such a deep topic. So awesome. So one other kind of topic I wanted to touch on, sort of as we're kind of diving into the features of the query agent and how it works, is this kind of like I think this sort of schema introspection thing is one of the most interesting things as you're talking about database companies like Weaviate that co-design agents with their database. Can you maybe talk to that? Just like, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So like the great thing about building an agent for a database is that you're working with a database. So databases are, strongly typed. They have different fields, they have different property types that can be created. And because of that, and because we are, we're building an agent and are the database business behind it, we know, okay, if something is a text property, we can constrain the LLM to only do like a certain set of operations against that. If something's a Boolean property, there's another set of operations that can be done. If something is a integer or like a array of strings or array of ints, there's effectively like a well-known set of API calls and operations that you can run against that. So what this means is like when we start the flow of the query agent, so your query comes in, gets routed to collections, and we start actually writing those queries, writing those aggregations, we can like we can like effectively present to the LLM for each field what the available options are. And because of that, because we can constrain the schema, we can also like know without executing ahead of time if a call is invalid. So like we can just not run, we can like effectively like constrain the schema and constrain the structured outputs from the model to like always return valid inputs for particular data types. So that really saves you time, because effectively you want to like avoid loops and retries as much as possible. Like they are inevitable, because there's some things that aren't like, you can't know if a query with filters is going to return results ahead of time, but there are some things you can know. So like you don't want to find yourself in a situation where you're running like queries or like specific filter types against a database, only to find out after like running the LLM and running the executing that query that it was actually an invalid combination. So the great thing here is we can kind of use the meta information that comes back from Weaviate to make sure that when the LLM produces an output, that it will be valid.
Yeah, and it's amazing. I mean, this kind of like structured outputs, like typing has solved text to SQL. That's kind of how I think about it. Is you can type these things. I guess like I was sort of when I remember when like sort of with the gorilla story when that first came out, and they're like, oh, you have these function calling arguments, and I was like, but why would the LLM follow the function calling? So I was still kind of like, no, text to GraphQL, but then this kind of wave of structured decoding, constrained generation, and it's like you can type it, and then you get the schema from the database. And I like, for me, software engineering thing, when I first saw how you could create like a Pydantic model on the fly and then you could throw that into the LLM. Yeah, that's a pretty
It is
cool.
quite amazing. And like I've been amazed over like the last couple of months watching people like Dan on our team, just like how far they can take the art, the artistry of like understanding like how to use things like Pydantic in like an expert manner, and like really make sure that like the how fine grained that like constraining and schema constraining like works is just, yeah, it's really impressive, and it saves you so much time, and it saves you so many errors. And like we had errors, and like we would notice them in production and then just fix them, because we had these like nice model types and stuff like that that you just alter, and then the LLM just magically follows those. It's really amazing.
Yeah, I think like the way software engineers organize like validating data is also quite relevant to this agent thing. I guess like in addition to structured outputs, you also like kind of in the DSPy story, you had DSPy assertions. It's kind of like some outputs you can't like strictly type as well, and so you still maybe have like an LLM validation step. And yeah, that just kind of lesson of learning how software engineers organize that like validating data models. Yeah, quite a deep one.
Yeah,
I guess.
it is kind of crazy just how like the paradigm is still shifting and stuff like that. Like when I first, like I remember years ago, like before we were working with like LLMs, and it's just at the end of your prompt you would just have like a JSON representation of like please return. And you begging effectively for it just to return something in like a specific format, and then you'd have to validate that when it came out like yourself. You'd have to write that validation, and like just to see, like I mean that's probably like the biggest trick that's made like agents such a success. Like not like just in general, like the made me believe in agents as well the last year or two, is just like how good structured output, tool calling, constraint decoding, all of these things have worked, because it's just that's probably like that on top of like the model development, like how the models have improved, has just made building agents such a feasible task now, because you just don't have to run all of this manual validation all the time, because it's just so time constraining, and so it's like a house of cards. It's just really fragile.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, well, I absolutely love that topic. I think it's such an interesting one. Maybe the quick one. There was a paper from Berkeley that came out recently about like designing agent first data systems. Sorry, I don't remember the exact title, but maybe something about like because you're always making these meta calls to get the schemas out to do this typing on the fly. Do you think maybe you should like the new database systems will like maybe cache that kind of information? Do you think it will change like the structure of the database system to support that better?
Yeah, like that's a cool one, because I think like yes, like being able to cache that kind of stuff and have it like freely like accessible will make how the agent performs better. Like for instance, like I know we've discussed this like at length, which is like if in Weaviate you've got like text arrays, and some people might use those as just like kind of high cardinality text arrays where it could be any type of value could appear in it. But very often what you see is that like when people are using like text array property types, what that really means is that like it's low cardinality and it's very likely some sort of categorical value. Like it's a categories type property. So like one thing we found is like if you can like do some meta analysis of those categories like kind of ahead of time or store those, well then you make like the query, like the agent's zero shot ability to like answer those type like questions, being like, oh, find me, I don't know, find me all the stocks in the last 12 months that have traded above X dollars, and then it can know, well, these are all the stocks available, so I could just search across each of those in the last 12 months and filter by date or something like that. But like things like that where there's like these little tricks that improve this. It's always around like the zero shot ability, I think, of like the agent. So like you want to, like I said earlier, you want to avoid having to do like a loop where it says, oh, we thought this value might exist in there. It doesn't. So like the more it can know upfront, the better. And like I think even like when we've been talking to users of the query agent the last couple of months, like I think some of like the suggestions we make on like how you just initialize your collection have changed. Like Weaviate's had this like description property available for like 6 years, and I chatted with Etienne about this. Like we laugh, like he laughs because like, I think they built it like 6 years ago, 7, like whatever it is. And people just generally don't want to type a long, lengthy description describing what a property does. It's like all developers, only write documentation if it's absolutely necessary, so that they might not do that. But what we found is with the query agent, because it has access to the schema and all of the little meta properties attached to it, if you write some like kind of short descriptive property descriptions that explain what the purpose of that property is in your database, well, then the query agent says, oh, thank you, that's great. Now I know at runtime, like what all of these properties are doing. You've given me a little description about what properties might appear in there, what they kind of look like. Maybe they're, I think Etienne had a use case where they were like, country codes, like length 2 country codes. There's like a proper name for that standard, like it's an ISO standard, but effectively saying, just all countries are allocated the 2-character country code format. So then when the query agent sees that, and then it knows, okay, when I'm filtering on this field, I'm not going to type in like Ireland, I'm going to type in like IE or whatever the two country code is. So little tricks like that help. And yeah, I think like what we've learned here is like maybe how people you might put in like a little bit of extra upfront effort when you create your collection or tables or whatever it is, but the payoff is that the agent is just able to navigate things a bit more seamlessly.
Yeah, that's actually the best example I've ever heard of that. Like California CA, as like an example of something that's hard to explicitly type. You're not going to write a literal with the. Sorry, I'm doing U.S. states because that's what I recall. You're not going to have like an enum with the 50 U.S. states. Instead, you have that kind of thing. And yeah, that sort of property description. Yeah, it's also amazing. I guess like yeah, like maybe I'm curious about that kind of like cardinality estimation. That's like a big thing with relational databases, and I think this is a really interesting kind of theme in Weaviate, that Weaviate is adding more and more support for structured data. And yeah, I don't want to I know we have something that's coming, but I don't want to preview it. But yeah, I do think that's an interesting thing with Weaviate, and the evolution of it is going from like unstructured vector search engine to supporting more and more database.
Yeah, and like with that cardinality estimation stuff, you can effectively just treat it like a heuristic, which is like you say, okay, like what's the size of my collection? Like how many objects do I have? And then you kind of say, okay, if there's like 10 values appearing X amount of times or something like that, you can kind of make like a decision as to whether this is like a high cardinality like column and not worth kind of saving information about because you won't get any nice filtering properties from it, or you can kind of like test and say, oh, this looks this appears to be that there's like a certain number of values appearing like only a unique amount of times. So like they've crossed some sort of threshold to indicate that they're high cardinality. Let's remember this information effectively.
Yeah, amazing. Well, also, so I think this actually transitions perfectly just to talking about collection routing, maybe a little bit further, like kind of, yeah, just maybe how you see that kind of federated search within Weaviate and that sort of application. And maybe I have my books and then I have my papers and they're in two separate collections, or maybe I have sort of my operational database and my analytical, like my operational collection and my analytical collection, like just sort of how you think about collection routing.
Yeah, I think this actually falls into a category of like something that I thought was kind of surprising again in how people use the query agent, because like for me it was like I thought it was like a nice to have in that you could have multiple collections and they might all be like very different, and users could run kind of like a federated search against them, and then the query agent will decide based on each collection, its schema and what it knows about those, which is the relevant one. And I was like, my initial thought was, oh yeah, it'll pick the one that's relevant and it will just run queries against that. But actually what we see is some people, the way they format their collections where there is like kind of like semantic joins between them, like they're separate collections, but there is crossover. So you might have like something about contracts and something about customers or something like that. But of course, customers have contracts, all of these types of things, all of these different like domain models that you could map. And what's really cool is it kind of solves this problem in Weaviate where now users have this ability to, whether it's ask or search mode, and it's probably even more powerful than search mode, where you can like run a query that needs to hit multiple collections and then get results back in like a single response format that like is like interleaved between the two or three collections. And like I think that's actually very, that kind of federated search is like really valuable to people in some ways that were kind of unexpected to me. But like again, I think the way that it works is um, it's using the metadata we know about the collection. So every collection has a name. So hopefully that name is informative. Every collection has like a set of properties and values and types, data types associated to that. So like part of that routing decision is to just like introspect, take a look at the collection names, take a look at like what those collections look like on the inside, and make a decision as to whether should this query hit just one of those, or actually is this question broad enough and like actually ambiguous enough that it would benefit from just doing this across all collections or across a subset of them.
Yeah, I think sort of the high level of the application is pretty clear. I guess like I'm just such a nerd that when you said semantic joins, it just like lit up my brain. And the first time I heard that term was when I had interviewed Madeline Holsabas. She works in like tabular intelligence, and yeah, that kind of I like you don't need to explicitly link these tables with a foreign key reference. You can sort of just look at, and again, as we mentioned, we have the typing of the possible values for the columns, and we can sort of do these joins on the fly between tables, I think. And then also you might not have exactly matched it, but you can use that AI layer in the middle.
And I think this is like what's interesting. Like in as part of the announcement, we kind of give a breakdown of the history of like database interfaces. But I think this is what's kind of exciting about not just what Weaviate is entering into right now, but where the world is kind of with agents, and that you you might have had this concept of semantic joins like years ago, but it was still kind of hard to work around, because at runtime and stuff like that, it's hard to figure out. Kind of need a human in the loop to figure out, oh, like that's about right, or you could train a model to do it, but it's going to have an error rate. But now you just kind of have this magic agent in the middle that can observe what you were asking, observe what's available, and then look at the results and see, oh yeah, like that's a natural join, and it will like do that join effectively at runtime for you. And it's really nice because yes, in classical databases in the past, you have like joins between tables, and of course that you could do that with Weaviate. You can key things and stuff like that. But it's also nice to have the ability to do that in kind of like a fuzzy manner as well. So yeah, I think it's really interesting, like what the new interface to databases and data systems is nowadays.
Yeah, amazing. Well, yeah. So I think all that has just been amazing. Maybe if we could just maybe just kind of now zooming out a bit, but then also maybe sort of still staying pretty technical. But like, so these are kind of some of the things that just generally go into the query agent. And now maybe talk, and then we talked about sort of with ask mode, you have these citations, and this we talked about the response model, but maybe we could also now talk about sort of newly introduced search mode and talk about sort of how that differs. And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So in short, search mode is ask mode the the answer generation at the end. But that's actually doing it a bit of a disservice, because there's, like, as we discovered, there's like a lot of work you need to do to make just the presentation of those results make sense. So for me, the way I see it is like ask mode is kind of designed for developers that are probably building something that's a bit end to end. So they might like have their data in Weaviate and now want to build like an end to end application that will be consumed by, like, so the developer user will build that for like end users. So you ask a question, you get like your end to end answer, or you have your conversational context in there. I think search mode is like designed for developers that like they might be a bit like closer to like a more classic information retrieval problem. So it's like kind of closer to the DB in that sense, or like kind of DB problems. So the kind of, I think our core guiding light for developing search mode was like, well, if we're going to build this, it has to be really like have really good retrieval quality. It has to like be like understandably better than just doing like a hybrid search without filters and things like this. So the idea there was, okay, how do we squeeze the most performance and like effectively give, like, say to develop, like I guess like the pitch to developers is, if you've got your data in Weaviate, if you use search mode, you're going to get expert information retrieval kind of techniques, learnings, and industry know-how just applied to your data with one API call, just out of the box. You don't need to do anything. The query agent will receive your query. It will like kind of put on any filters it sees. It will decompose your query if needed to. It will expand some of the terms if it thinks that would be valuable. And then it will give you back a set of search results that are like re-ranked in the context of your original answer. And, ideally, those answers should be much, much better than if you were to just run that query yourself without any kind of knowledge about how you sort of shaped it, or whether it would have needed filters and stuff like that. And I think like what we found is like there's this really cool, we're at this really cool stage where, we started off with SQL in the 70s, purely structured. Then you get to like ORMs and drivers and stuff like that. They make like the interface much more developer friendly, but you're still dealing with like SQL under the hood, but really great, like much more developer friendly. Fast forward to something like RAG, which is amazing, and you're like pretty much the language that users can talk to their data in is now pure natural language. You can just say, whatever your question is, you can just give it to you can give it to the database, and the database will like semantically understand that. But not a silver bullet. There actually are some things from like the more structured world that people like, and that's things like filters and being able to extract certain kind of concrete rules that should be applied. And I think that's what search mode can kind of do, is say, hey, you have the semantic portion of your query, but there might be an intent in what you said, and a field or property in your collection that matches like a filter there, being like, find me some nice summer shoes to wear on the beach that are less than $200, because who's going to be spending more than $200 in shoes like that? And it might see, there's like a price property here, and that's marked in dollars. So let's make sure that there's an explicit filter there to filter below $200. And RAG can't really, differentiate what numbers are. Vectors, that's just kind of beyond the scope of what they can represent. But they're great for the semantic portion of that query. So now with search mode, you can extract the summer shoes, whatever, and then convert the price intent to a concrete filter. And all of this happens under the hood, and you just get back a set of search results. And but just by definition, the retrieval quality on that is going to be much better than doing, BM25 vector or hybrid, just because you've reduced the search space down. You've done what is like applying filters like this just improves the search quality, but it's very hard to do at runtime, and it's very hard to ask developers to build applications that like can interpolate a query at runtime. But with search mode, that kind of just comes out of the box.
Yeah, I love that. I think, just echoing what you said, that sort of like text interface. I think that's why RAG became so popular out of the box as a sort of, companion with ChatGPT and with the early generation of LLMs, and now sort of having this like text SQL layer solves the like, how do I bring structured context? And then there's this interesting thing in the middle where it's like still like a search query, but you also get benefit from having a filter, but not so much structure. You have like a little bit of structure. There's like maybe content, like the canonical vector database schema is like content and then nothing else, like everything else in a JSON or something. And I guess but I'm maybe just one other thing, talking about these sort of search information retrieval pipelines. I'm just really excited to be sort of like, we know, I think everyone working in information retrieval knows that you can kind of overfetch with a first stage hybrid search, like say 50 candidates, and then take it down to say 20 with like cross encoders or list-wise re-ranking. And then just once you open the box of these pipelines, there's all these things like query writing, query expansion, and then there's like all this depth to queries. Like even just the other day, I saw a survey paper just on query expansion, and so it's like there's just all these things that you can do.
Yeah, and I think that's what I really like about it, because like this is like how you do query expansion well or decomposition well, is like this is like evolving research and changing over time. But the cool thing is, I like view this like the query agent and something like search mode in particular. It's like we can just evolve that over time with the best practices as they change. Like if a new piece of research comes out saying like this is the way to expand terms for queries, we could just apply that, and like magically overnight the API can just get better overnight, because like I said, it's like in a way, you've been working like incredibly hard on the benchmarking on this, right? And it's like, we publish these results, and search mode is x amount better than just doing pure hybrid, and like that's really cool. But it's also like not surprising. It's not like we're saying we've invented a new BM25 or a new like dense vector or sparse vector mode. It's like, no, what we've done is like we've applied the best practices from the industry and like kind of wrap them up into this API. So that's why it's a compound system, but it's just super user friendly to use. But that's why it performs well. So it's like we have this kind of living thing that we can improve over time.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, it's so cool building that like agent layer on top of the search application that we have for sort of vector indexing, vector storage. I sort of hold out in thinking I think search is like the biggest application of vector databases, but I sort of hold out in thinking there are definitely other interesting applications. Like I really like it for population analysis, and I talked on the podcast with Martin Grutendorf recently about like the cataloging data, and I think that kind of analyzing populations of data or novelty in AI, or even these ideas about like putting the vector into the model inference. But yeah, I'm just really excited about it. It's so cool having this like agent layer on top of an application that we know to enhance it and get it further.
I mean, like, I think I've discussed this on this podcast a few times. I can't not get a mention of graph vectors because it seems to be my go-to. But like anything you can model as a vector effectively benefits from being pumped into a vector database, especially once you're at scale. So if you've got a big representation of graphs that are like you've tuned into looking like embeddings, well then get those 100, it might be like proteins or something from that world.
Wow.
They're represented as vectors. You can search across them and find like novel discoveries and link prediction, all of these types of cool things that you can do. So yeah, search is a very natural, like an obvious functionality, but all the benefits and things that we've built extend beyond that too, if that's your use case.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, and the multimodal thing is all just super amazing. Amazing. So maybe sort of like pivoting out, I think that was awesome deep dive of tech. I just really enjoyed talking about that. But maybe if we could just kind of talk a little more about the GA release of the Query Agent and sort of just setting the stage of where we're at. I think the integration with the Cloud Console is awesome. I love it personally. And maybe if you could just kind of describe the journey of that, and then yeah, what is?
Yeah, absolutely. So like the query agent like was first and foremost designed as like a like a client SDK or through an API. So it's available obviously for Python and TypeScript right now. But of course, we have this great cloud product and console where we want users to be able to get a taste of what the query agent is. And if someone's there are almost like two types of users. If someone's using the query agent through code, they might have like an application that they've like deployed to production that's running regularly on a certain cadence or something like that. But there's also this other type of user that comes to the console and they just want to engage with their Weaviate data. Like they've spent the time crafting a collection, getting their data in. There's of course GraphQL, and that's one way you can interact with your database. But maybe they just want to say like, I just want to talk to my data and get like an understanding of how Weaviate works. And I think that's like a really nice feature of what the query agent does in the console. It means it gives users the ability just to get data in and just start getting value out of Weaviate. Maybe like ask a couple of questions and see, oh, like I just created a property for my collection and I tagged it as a string, but it's actually a number or it's a date. I would have benefited from making that like a concrete data type, like that matches what it actually is. So they might go back and reformulate their collection, rebuild it, and change the data types or something like that. And I think just having that like back and forth with your data should add a lot of value for users. And you can do aggregates. So you can say, look, how many objects do I have? It means that kind of the people that didn't create the data or like import it into Weaviate can also engage with it and like get a sense of what's in there. So my hope is that it kind of enables users to interact with their data in just a more user friendly and maybe in some like novel ways as well.
Yeah, it's so cool. It's so fun to use. And maybe even just talking, like giving shout outs to like Paul and David and Yaru and Jolanta and everyone work. I just this kind of like GUI console for the database.
Yeah. I mean,
Pretty
like,
neat.
yeah, like we spoke about at the start, but like it was so cool just to see the enthusiasm. Like we had built this as an API, and like I think once we had the TypeScript client, there was such enthusiasm from the entire like product and like cloud team, like Paul, Yao, David, everyone, just to be like, oh, how do we get this into the console? Because like they saw it was like giving them value for like when they're testing out new features in Weaviate and new features in the console, being like, well, this they thought it was cool, so they were like really positive around adding it to the console. So I was obviously more than happy to help because again, it's just really good feedback to get because I love when I hear of people in Weaviate just using it and like dog fooding the product because it's and like giving me honest feedback as well, being like, hey, I'm going to use this method or this part of the API, but I don't think it's very user friendly and stuff like that. And I love hearing that because you can make the changes, and it's very hard to make changes when you don't know what's not working, right?
Yeah. No, I also really love the Explorer. Like as mentioned, I've been going through like the beer, doing all the search benchmarking. I love just clicking through the Explorer to just see the data sets better.
It's amazing. Like pretty like I have this new flow now when like I'm testing new features with the query agent, which is like we can have it deployed and I can now write the zero code. I can just go to the console. I can import my data from a CSV I have. I can create all my properties, mark which ones I want vectorized. I can import that. Uses our own embedding service, so that's super fast. Gets the data in. It's already pre-vectorized. No API keys needed. I can then go to the Explore console, have a look at the data, say, yep, that meets my expectations. And then I can go straight to the agents tab and just try the query agent and just start talking with my data. And let's say I push something that changes how we do filtering or something that changes how we write the answers or something like that. I can like kind of immediately validate whether that has worked or not. No
Yeah,
code.
so yeah, that is super interesting, and I didn't know that you. I love learning these little nuggets about what you can do with Weaviate. With the, I didn't know you can mark the columns with the CSV import. So yeah, I'll definitely have to. Yeah, yeah, I'll see like a conversation in Slack about some feature in Weaviate. That'll be like 6 months ago or something, and then I'll comment like, "Thank you." Like even as outdated as it is. Yeah, it's always.
It's so fast. Is what happens when you have a lot of great people working very, very hard to like release new features all the time.
Yeah, amazing. Awesome. So I think maybe kind of, I know we're kind of coming up on the hour, so I'm trying to pack these questions in, but maybe talking a little bit about the sort of MetaBuddy case study and just, yeah, your experience with that.
Yeah, so we had MetaBuddy, who's one of the earliest users of the query agent, and it was just they were so useful because they had a really interesting use case around effectively like having this personal assistant that like tracks like your fitness and your nutrition and stuff like that. And the reason I really like latched onto this use case and found it really great to work with was because the data inside of those collections was like, very like structured in that sense. There's like meals, there's nutrition, there's exercises, all of these things. So like it was a really good testing bed to see how good the query agent's filtering capabilities were, and like abilities to do aggregations and date filtering and all of these types of things. We were able to really like fine tune and like discover what the failure modes were and discover where it was working well, and saw that that it being a chat application would work better and stuff like that. So they were really great to work with, and just gave like really great feedback. And like I said, I loved the use case because it was like kind of exactly where I wanted to see the query agent shine, which is like you've got all of this in like this collection is really well structured. You've got all of the data and like information around the data types available to you. Like go make the most out of this. And I think it it has been a success for them, and it has shown like kind of saved them a lot of development time and improved engagement and stuff like that with their application.
Yeah, and I love the query that is quote. Sorry, I remember the release post will be this will be published. I guess will be published after that, so I can say it now. But the query of show my protein heavy dinners under 600 calories last week and how they affected recovery. I love how, for me, one thing that instantly jumps out about that is the collection routing, because you might have the dinner log and then you also have the articles on how does that affect recovery. So that's like the kind of canonical vector searching thing is you've got all the scientific papers on from recovering from workouts. Yeah.
Exactly. And like, you look at that question that query you just asked, and you can kind of like start to extract, you can kind of in your head map what the semantic aspect of that is to what the structured part is. So protein heavy dinners is probably like a semantic query you might send in to like a nutrition collection or something that includes like kind of meals you've eaten. But like 600 calories last week, that like 600 calories, like, okay, if the data is like saying this meal was X amount of calories, you can actually filter on that in a structured manner. And if you look at something like last week, well, then if you just make the agent aware of what date today is, it can say, okay, I'm this user has given me a window. I know what the window I should be looking is. So that's two filters like that you can extract, like a human can extract from your head, being like, this is how I would approach this. If I were to like spend the time writing the Weaviate filters for this question, I would like make this the semantic query and this the structured part. So that's why it was really cool, because it was a great testing bed, like I said, for those types of questions.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, so sort of a question I like to anchor the podcast with is what directions excite you the most for the future of AI? But I guess, Charles, you have to answer that one when you return for your 6.5 half. I was trying to have appearance on the podcast, but so maybe for this podcast particularly, what directions for the future of the query agent excite you the most?
Yeah, like I think like what I see with the query agent is like, first and foremost, it's like the directions are paying attention to how our users are using it and what's missing in the future. So we added this new mode. So I'm very interested to see, do some new modes that users want to utilize like just pop up as organic use cases over time. Like I don't know how the things change so fast in the next year. There might be some new paradigm or something like that emerges. So I'm like, what new kind of cool mode might pop up, whether it's using other tools or something like this, or even just having like a really deep thinking mode that where you maybe it's like users are happy to really let this agent just run over Weaviate for a while, kind of like this deep research stuff that you see, and say, okay, I'm just going to give me 10 minutes just to like work over your data, work over the database, and come back to you with something really interesting. So that's really interesting to me, to see if we have this kind of loopy research mode in there with the query agent. But I think more broadly then is this idea of like memory has really been like coming up a lot lately. And it's not just like the query agent, it's like for anyone building with agents or building with conversations and stuff like that. It's like, what is the function of like memory, and like memory for both agents and for users to like improve how these systems operate over time. Like, is it the unlock that like kind of allows for like what you would previously maybe call like online training and just like kind of self-improvement over time? And I think it might be like, I think probably where some agents are failing in production or like out in the wild is that there's just like a lack of continuity. And it's not just agents, it's also just conversations. Like, I think the expectations that people have from these systems now is that if it makes a mistake, it should learn from that and it should like remember that. And it shouldn't make it again. And I think memory is just like more and more you're hearing about it. You're hearing about it in the context of whether it's chat applications, or you're hearing about it in the context of like these deep kind of agentic systems, whether it's like booking systems and stuff like that, storing user preferences, whatever it might be. But it seems like memory is like a really powerful way to solve a lot of these problems. And I think it just has such a natural crossover with vector databases and a store of value. Like, can a vector database make memory more efficient? And like, are there whole new infrastructure changes that can be made to make memory work at scale?
Yeah, amazing. Well, Charles, thanks so much for joining the podcast. Congratulations on the GA release of the Query Agent. It's been such a fun conversation, and I really hope it inspires people to check out the Query Agent and just generally be excited about Weaviate. Charles, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, Connor. Thanks.